Hello, welcome back to the channel. This is another one of my videos, Mind's Eye Theatre, talking about live action role-playing games. And this is again delving into the sort of mechanics of how to do it, some of my learning experiences. I'd like to share some of the stuff that over the years I've developed my style. The books themselves have got some great tips for being a great storyteller, but that's a baseline and you can move on from it. And you don't have to do all of this, obviously. You can pick and choose what you want to do, and you might have your own top tips. And if you do, feel free to put them on the channel. I love talking about such things. Now, my experiences as a storyteller, I've run local, what you call troop games, of all different stripes and all different settings and systems. Vampire, Dark Ages, Sabbat, Mage, Werewolf, and I've run games as part of an organisation, Camera UK, and I operated on every level, so domain level stuff, regional storyteller, and a national storyteller. And I've also run a couple of one-off kind of organisation games, org games, special events, and also being involved not just as the head storyteller, but the assistant storyteller. So hopefully, if you think about doing some Mind's Eye Theatre storytelling, these top tips will help you. I've got a wee piece of paper, so keep myself on track and don't get too distracted. First one, and actually this is a great tip for just storytelling in general, is be consistent. Okay, so be consistent with what you approve and why you approve it. Obviously, you've kind of got common stuff in your game and not so common stuff in the game. And if you see my other videos, you'll know I've been doing a questionnaire of players. One of the things that rile people up is storyteller favoritism. And one of the things you can overcome that is by setting up your kind of rules, your standards for approvals and sticking to them. Be consistent with what time you're going to start the game. So people can come, be prepared, get ready. And there's nothing worse than, say, a storyteller saying, we're going to start 7:30, and they're not getting round kicking off till about 8:15. There's another video about organising games and setting it up, but ultimately you only have a set amount of time to play. So if you're not on time and get your game kicked off in time, then it's going to be a bit crappy for your players. What you find is if you starting later, more people will start turning up later, and more people turn up later, you'll be tempted to start later, and anyway, it's a disaster happening. Be consistent with downtime responses, what time you want it, what date you want it in before the game, how you're going to deal with it, and getting back to players. Nothing worse than players submitting downtimes and the storyteller being a bit tardy and getting back with downtimes. Your rules calls, be consistent with your rules calls as well. And if you have to pull something off out of the ether, or make a call, write it down and stick to it, or explain to people why you made that call, and move on and then go back to it. People don't mind kind of mistakes happening or stuff happening on the fly or things not quite being right, but just communicate with it. And that's the other thing. Be consistent with your communications. You're going to have to be available to players, not 24/7, but let players know what they can expect from you and what you expect from them, and it creates a harmonious player and storyteller relationship, because it's not player versus storyteller. It's a communal storytelling experience. Second one is have staff. Assistants and administrators. There's a whole side of organising a game that goes into administration, so you might want to have an assistant just deals with the administration of the game. But also assistants on the night. So you've both got your narrators for rules calls, but you've also got, I used to have an assistant that used to help me with downtime. So at the start of the game, players could go to that assistant storyteller and ask questions about downtime or got rumours or set stuff up. I also had an assistant that would help new players coming up to the game, so deal with any character creation questions, be a bit den mother with those players, and then those would then become my narrators in game, help out with rules calls and stuff. And what that did for me was free me up so that I could get myself ready, deal with anything else I needed to deal with, and get time in at a consistent time I was talking about, and be ready to rock and roll. Another thing is being a great storyteller is about what comes after you. So you're going to set up a game. You're the person with vision. You set up a game, and it's great. You know, it hits what you want to do, hits all the spots. But eventually, there's going to be a time when you have to step down. You might, depending on whether you're part of an organisation or whether you're part of a troop game, if you're running a continuous game, the stepping down of a storyteller is a critical period for a game. What I often see is a storyteller might do a year's term, a year and a half term, and then there's an election or something and a new player takes over as storyteller. What I would challenge groups, organisations to do is say, let's say a storyteller's term is a year and a half. After a year, you're having elections for the next storyteller who's going to come in. That next storyteller comes in before that year and a half's up and becomes an assistant to the main storyteller, so they can learn their trade and also get feedback, learn what's going on behind the scenes, get continuity, get used to the role, so that handover is seamless. Because players don't necessarily see or appreciate what goes on as a storyteller. It's easy for players to criticise storytellers. Boom, yeah, there you go, said it. But they don't necessarily see all the stuff that goes on behind the scenes. You have to create your boundaries of how much time you're going to put in as a storyteller. It's easy to spend a lot of time being a storyteller, but you have to create boundaries. And that's why a good term might be a year and a half, because you're going to get burned out. Because it is a lot of work. And people get burned out generally hate the organisations that they're part of. So yeah, think about yourself, how you're going to hand over, and get that handover happening beforehand, so that you can train and pass on your great ideas. Doesn't mean new storyteller has to follow what you're doing, but it helps continuity of the game. Stick to the rules. Okay, if you've got a set of rules, rule book, addendums, etc., stick to it. Players will spend ages mulling over the rules, thinking about things. So yeah, you have to know the rules. I'm a big picture guy. For me, the rules are there to help a story, but I also appreciate that some people are all about the mechanics and getting into that nitty gritty and making stuff happen. So you have got to be all people to all people. The other thing is stick to the outer character rules as well. That's vital. You have to be a paragon of what a good behaviour looks like, both in-game and out of game. You can't expect it from your players if you're not doing it yourself. Next up, plot lines. Your plot lines don't need to threaten the world, the city, big, it's going to blow up. Your plot line should be the backdrop to player actions. Again, coming back to that player questionnaire, one of the things players that came up strongly was players never used to want to feel like they were being railroaded or pushed down a particular plot line. And I find these kind of big end of world threat games do that. So yeah, don't use it. Players want player agency. Players want the city to feel, and the plot lines just be things that they can take advantage of to help push their plots and agendas. And that's it. Player agency. The best game is when you've got players so engaged that they're moving against each other, they're plotting against each other, and that's all you need to do. And you could throw the odd thing in, but actually, you shouldn't have hunters there every week. You shouldn't need the werewolf, the 10 o'clock monster. Yeah, 10 o'clock monster, in case you don't. Most of coming from the UK, most of our games on pub function rooms, kicking off about 8 o'clock, finishing about 11. Generally, there was a 10 o'clock monster of the week turned up because an hour was enough time to run a mass combat. Yeah, not a great game. And as you can see, I'm using the idea of 10 o'clock monster with duration. Next point, kind of building on something I said earlier, is know when to hand over, step back, and avoid burnout. Nothing worse than a burned out ST who think, oh, nobody else could do it, I've got to do it. Your game's going to suffer. If you're not switched on for your game, how do you expect your players to be switched on for their game? And if nobody's there to take over and you're burned out, sometimes a pause is as good as a rest, and recuperate your energies. One of the things you're going to have to do as a storyteller is learn how to say no. Simple as. Players are going to come to you with all sorts of crazy, wonderful and wacky things that they've created. Doesn't mean they're bad players. Everybody likes something cool, something unique about their characters. Everybody's got their own wee twist on things. So maybe, coming back to the start, be consistent with approvals. If you're clear with what you want to approve, it's easy to say no. Okay? And it could be your best friend in the world asking for something. And it's probably as vital that you say no to them as you would that person who just walked in for the first time. The other way to look at maybe approvals and adding weird stuff in is learn how to say yes, but. So for example, when I was at Sabat ANST for the UK, it was during the Year of Fire stuff. And we already knew the Ravnos were going to get toasted. Okay? But I like to try and accommodate players, so there was what I wrote in the settings guide for the Sabat UK was you can play Ravnos and Tribute. However, when the time comes, you will lose this character. No ifs, no buts, no coconuts. So that if you really loved Ravnos and wanted to explore that Ravnos and Tribute character, you could. But we were very clear at the start about where that was going to end and what was going to happen. Next one, talked about this in the other Mind's Eye Theatre videos. Look after your new players. If you want your game to run on and on and on and on, or if you're running an old game, you want players to come back to it, look after your new players. They're vital. Your regular player base, let's say you've got 20 regular players. Over time, real life will happen and that player base will dwindle. So if you're not recruiting new players and helping new players integrate into the game, then your game will end. That's it. There's nothing else for it. So look after your new players. So like ideas is have storytellers. Talk to your existing players about the role they play both in character and out of character with new players. One of the other things that comes up in the player questionnaires is cliquiness, and actually it's quite hard as somebody to come into a new organisation or group, want to be involved, want to chat to people, and kind of little social groups kind of excluding you almost. So it's really difficult to integrate yourself anyway. So have a think about that. Have a think about what naturally occurs and what you could do to kind of overcome those barriers. Like I say, I used to have an assistant storyteller for new players, and that person could guide them through games, deal with them out of game, and yeah, new players, new blood is vital. New blood, see what I did there? New blood is vital to keeping your game healthy and running. With players, more isn't always best. So you need to grow games. You need to keep your player numbers healthy. I would reckon for just a local game that's going to keep on running, 20 to 30 players is the sweet spot. Both in terms of attention you give them as players, venues you can get above 30, you could start getting bigger and bigger venues. Less than 20, certainly less than 15. You don't quite have enough players for sort of proper intercity plots to feel good. But more isn't always best. And what this means is sometimes you will get toxic players or groups of players. Players who, and I say toxic suggests it's a decision by those players. Players who don't gel with your game, your style, your vision or your shared vision. If you've got 15 players that want to just have a nice friendly social game and you've got 2 players which are all about combat all the time, and they're doing stuff to disrupt and bring baddies to the game and stuff, and it's constantly disruption, you need to talk to those two players. You might need to move them on. Could be, again, toxic players. It could just be a horrible person. You might not want it, but get rid. It's easier in the long run. If you have a problem with a player as a storyteller, first step is communicate and talk to them. That doesn't solve the problem. Seek input from other people. It could just be a personality clash. It might not. If other people agree with you, get rid. You don't owe yourself sleepless nights when you're worrying about one player or two players. In the long run, a harmonious game is a much better game than a game with all sorts of internal tensions. And with that as well, talk to people, seek feedback and offer feedback. This is one of the things I wish I knew at the start of my storytelling career. You could think you're doing good stuff, but if you're not getting feedback, if it's not being received the way you hope it's getting delivered, then something's wrong. You can always change yourself. You can't change other people, as I'm always told. And I say, there's a whole host of stuff on this about players sticking in their lanes and stuff, and how games work. Vampire's a very stratified society, so you've got sort of the Elder ruling council, the Ancilla and the Neonates. Now, if your Elders players are running around like Neonates on the streets, solving all the plots, running around with their trench coats and katanas, it's going to be really difficult for these newer players, these Neonates, to do stuff. So you have to start talking to those Elder players and saying, actually, Mr. Prince, you need to be the person sat at the back giving the quests to the new Neonates to go and do. And if a player wants to play an Elder, then you have to have a conversation with them about what does that entail. What does that mean you can do, and what does that mean you can't do? Is that the style of game you want? And if it's not, play a Neonate. And as you can see there, by talking about stuff early, you're dealing with problems early before they come up and really start to derail the game. And that's the thing, be proactive, both in your communication with players on an in-character basis, out-of-character basis, so that you're all on the same page. Most games start fracturing when, instead of a shared vision of moving in the same direction, people aren't talking about what they want, what they need, what they're going to do, and the game starts splintering. I mean, it's good probably as a game splinter because we ended up with hundreds of games, but it's bad because, who wants drama in their life? And certainly I don't. I just want a nice, easy, fun life. Life's too short for drama and bitterness. But anyway, they're my top tips, thoughts, ideas for being a great storyteller. I'll delve into more of those in some videos later on. But yeah, that's me, over and out, and I'll talk to you again. Bye bye.